All right. Hi, everybody. It looks like everybody is here, so we will get started. Glad you're back. We are back at it with Heron's History. So today, what we're going to do is talk about some different ways of ruling. We have looked at quite a few different ways in the past several units, all the way actually from the beginning of the course till now. And so we're going to take a little bit of time just to pause and kind of reflect and think about some different ways of ruling, ways people live under their government, and see what you remember, help refresh your memory, and then you're going to have a chance to create, which is always the fun part. So we'll be able to see what you know and help make some more connections and let you have your creative juices flow away. Okay, so before we get started, I want to just get an idea of how many of you out there think that you can just right away off the top of your head, you could, if I were to ask you right now, give me three forms of government or three different ways of ruling. Okay, by a show of hands or actually just your thumbs up if like, yep, I could do that right now, I think. Or no, I'd have to refresh and go look at some notes, or like, I'm not quite sure, I might, maybe. So on the count of three, give me a thumbs up if yes, you can. A thumbs down, no, miss, I need to refresh, or I'm not sure. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, yes, not quite sure, yes. All right, so by the show of that, it looks like a lot of you are actually quite confident, which is wonderful to see. Now, my next question for you is, who thinks that they might be able to give me a list of five ways of governing, forms of government? Okay, yes, okay, now there's not quite so many confident thumbs up, and that's okay. We just need to see where we are so we have an idea of how we're going to get there. Okay, fantastic. Now, what about last one before we move on? Who thinks, give me a thumbs up if you think you could list me more than 5 ways of governing. Okay, there's a whole lot more wiggles. Okay, no worries. Just want to have an idea to see where we're starting today with. So when we think we can just spit out a few forms of government. It's exactly what I want us to do. So at this point, I would stop and I would either have a chat, or I would have us all that we could see video maybe, or one of my favorites are a poll, or a Padlet where everybody could see what was going on. So that's where I would then say this to the students. Okay, great. What I want us to do is just take a couple of minutes, and on the Padlet here is to do a brain dump. So just list what forms of government come to mind, like that word association that we do lots of times, right? So if I say fruit, what are things that come to mind? Apples, oranges, bananas, pineapple, whatever. So I'm saying forms of government. So I want you to write down what comes to mind. Don't worry about your spelling. That's not what this is about right now. It's your idea. Okay? So we'll give you 30 seconds, 40 seconds, and we'll see how many you come up with. Ready, set, go. And so I would give them maybe 30 seconds was a little bit short, but like a 45 seconds, a minute. Look and see what's there. Comment as things come up on the board. And so to see what they actually come up with for students. After that, I would go into looking at the forms of government that were generated by the students, and I would ask for some share outs. Again, could be added to the Padlet, or a hands up in our electronic format, maybe in the chat, or just some students willing to speak out, maybe if either through writing or vocally. Features of different forms of government that were listed. And what would it look like if you lived under an absolute monarchy? What would it look like living under representative democracy? Those kinds of things. And then from there, I would ask the students to think about, from the ones that are listed, if they could choose, what kind of way of governing and what kind of government to live under. What do they feel would be their most preferred way of ruling to live under, and why, and their least preferred way of ruling, and why. And this is going to set the stage then for what I'm going to have them do in their activity. So I can at first see at the beginning of the lesson what they remember already from the forms of government that they generate as a class. I can help then to scaffold and say, okay, for theocracy, we had seen in ancient Egypt, what was that we saw? What was it that we saw in ancient Greece? What was it that we saw in ancient Rome? And whatever course that we happen to be talking. So this is world history this lesson is for world history. So I would use units that we've already talked about and to help refresher to scaffold what we're looking for. And then from there, I say, today our standard that we're going to go through and our learning targets, to look at those and see then what we're going to do to demonstrate that knowledge. And so the state standard that Missouri has us looking at, what we'll be looking at today, is world history, because that's where we are, 9 to 12, world history 5, GSA, and that says to compare and contrast evolving governmental systems, including monarchy, theocracy, totalitarianism, and representative government, to determine their impact on society. Okay, so you guys did a great job. You pulled out every single one of those forms of government somewhere in there in our list. So kudos, that is wonderful to see. And then we talked about some different features that are in there. So we are already well on our way to what we need to accomplish for this lesson. So the state standard, those are the big fancy words from Missouri. And so if we break that down, what can I as a student do? By the end of this lesson, what we will be able to say that you can do is you can define monarchy, you can define theocracy, all those 5, I think there's 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I had a 5th one there. So those 4 forms of government, you'll be able to define them, each one, and you're going to be able to identify an example. So students can identify an example of theocracy. Students can identify an example of totalitarianism, etc. Okay, so how are we going to show that? Well, this is where your creativity comes in. Remember that storyboard platform that we have used before, and lots of students, almost everybody I think, said they really enjoyed it, so I thought we would use that again. It can be used in many different ways, and this time around what we're going to do is, what you're going to do, and I will help you along the way, is create a mind map. It's also known as a spider map. So you see like your idea that's there, and then you'll have a line that goes out, and you'll have another idea, that kind of thing. So what we want to do before we just jump in, we want to have an idea like what needs to go on there. How do I get my good grade, miss? What are you looking for? Right? So we'll have a list of criteria. But before we do that, that gets ahead a little bit, let's look at some examples. Okay, so we can give an idea of what that might look like, and we'll look at some, and we're going to point out, when we look at them, some strong points and maybe still some areas of improvement where that student could have done a little bit better. Okay, now at this point I'll stop and show some exemplars from past students from Storyboard That, and students would then be able to identify what might be considered as a rubric or checklist before it's actually shown to them what good ones would look like. And ultimately, I would provide this checklist so they would do monarchy, either absolute or constitutional monarchy, dictatorship or totalitarianism, democracy. They need to do representative democracy, but they could do direct as well as an extra, and then theocracy. For my IEP students, depending on what was needed, if they needed to not have as much done, then they could do 3 of the 4, and we would, they could either choose which one to not do, or we could leave out monarchy. I have criteria here for their work in their mind map that they'll do. The form of government is identified. They'll do a definition summary in their own words as if they had to explain it to a younger sibling or a middle schooler. An example in history, it could be modern day or in the past, of that type of government. Have a relevant and appropriate scene and characters items in their cartoon from storyboard that, and then they would rank each form of government, 1 being the one that they believe is the most desired form of ruling to live under, and 5 being the least amount, with an explanation in there somewhere. And so how I could help kids along, some formative assessment right at the beginning to see what they know and don't know, as they go through, and features of the government to help add to that as students are working, whether I have GoGuardian or some kind of way to be able to see what the students are actually working on and giving them live in the moment feedback, like on Google Forms, for instance. I can see what they're doing, or GoGuardian, I can see what is on everybody's screen, so I can actually chat with students live in the moment. Let me see here. Another thing that I would have them do before they turn it in for a final grade would be to have, if at all possible, 1 or 2 peers look at their work with fresh eyes and then do that checklist, so they could do that together in class. Look at my thing, and then the checklist, yes, it's there, yes, it's there, yes, it's there. Well, what about this? Or do you know, some recommendations on maybe switching it, so they have some fresh eyes looking at their work and finding the evidence there before they actually turn it in for final grade. Just trying to think, how would students know if they were successful or not? Definitely by having them look through the checklist themselves. Okay, go find this. So if we all take a moment, go find this. This is the criteria. And yes, you go find it in your work, and you've also had a peer do that. We've also looked at exemplars before they even get started. And then as students are working, I can give them feedback at different stages wherever they are. So learning targets in there as I'm going through, introducing the lesson to say what we're going to do, and then as we go through the checklist or the assignment, then we can say, you know, how this then would relate to the learning targets. And as they turn it in, okay, how do you feel? Yes, I can do this. Yes, it's there. And so at different points along the way, those learning targets are mentioned. They're just not kind of one and done. I would have digital resources. I've got Storyboard that. There's different apps. And then also depending on what the school platform would like to have. The IEP, any of my kiddos with IEP that need extra time, so working with them, if it helps for them to talk it out, maybe it's the reading and the spelling, then we could maybe do, whether it's Google Docs, talk to text, and then we could just paste that, copy and paste that into the storyboard format, or if they prefer to do it in Google Slides, then I could be open to having more than one way for to demonstrate their knowledge in whatever product that they want. I think that is about it. That was on there. that is it. And I could talk and talk for so much more because I absolutely just love this and getting right into the teaching and the mix of it. But that is it for now. Thanks so much.